The first time my bank account crossed seven figures, I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store with a box of blueberries in my hand. I had already put them in the cart once, then I took them out. Then I stood there in the aisle for a second too long, staring at the price like it had personally insulted me. And that was the moment I realized something I had spent years trying not to admit. Money does not just change your life, it exposes who you were while you were getting there, because I should have felt free. I should have felt proud. I should have felt like all the cheap meals, all the late nights, all the panic, all the maybe next month versions of my life had finally paid off. Instead, I sat in that parking lot and felt something colder, not joy, not relief, just a strange, quiet fear that the broke version of me never actually left. And once I saw that, I started remembering what broke actually felt like. Not the dramatic version, not the movie version, the real version, the version that happens in grocery stores, the version that happens in gas stations, the version that happens when you check your banking app before answering a text because the number in your account decides what kind of day you are allowed to have. I was 24 years old, and every decision had a price tag attached to it. Not just the obvious ones, the invisible ones. Could I go out tonight, or should I stay home and make something from the pantry? Could I say yes to dinner, or should I pretend I was busy? Could I fill the gas tank now, or should I stretch it another day and hope nothing bad happens before Friday? Could I replace the cracked phone, or should I keep pretending the black line across the screen was not making me feel stupid every time I used it in public? You do not usually feel broke in one giant moment. You feel it in a thousand small ones. You feel it when you put something in the cart and then take it back out because you know the total is already getting too high. You feel it when you lower the brightness on your phone before opening your bank app, not because anyone else can see it, but because some part of you still feels embarrassed by the number. You feel it when you sit in your car for a minute before going inside, just to mentally prepare yourself for the cost of existing. That is what being broke really is. Not chaos, precision. Your whole life becomes an exercise in invisible calculation, and the worst part is how quickly your mind learns to call that normal. That is what financial stress does. It becomes routine. It teaches you to smile while your chest stays tight. It teaches you to say, "I'm tired," when you really mean, "I cannot afford to be honest." It teaches you to act relaxed while your body is quietly keeping score. You stop being shocked by pressure. You stop telling people the truth. You stop saying, "I can't afford that." Instead, you say things like, "maybe next time," or "I'm just tired," or "I'll see." And eventually, people stop asking. That is level zero. Not failure, not poverty in the dramatic sense. Just a life under pressure so long that pressure starts feeling like personality. I used to think the first real goal was to make enough money so I could stop feeling that way. I was wrong. The first real goal was simply to breathe. That happened the day I saw $10,000 in savings for the first time. 10,000. It sounds small to some people. It sounds almost laughable to people who grew up around money. But to me, it felt like stepping into a room I had never been allowed into before. Not because it made me rich, it didn't, but because it gave me space, and when you've lived too long close to zero, space feels almost spiritual. For the first time, one unexpected bill did not feel like a personal attack. One surprise expense did not feel like a threat to the whole month. One bad day did not automatically become a bad week. That is what money gives you at first. Not luxury, not status, relief from constant threat. I remember sitting on my bed that night, holding my phone like I was afraid the number would vanish if I moved too fast. $10,000. I did not celebrate. I just stared at it, because I knew enough to understand that this was not freedom. It was only the first crack in the wall. Still, that crack changed everything, because once your brain feels breathing room, it starts looking for more. That is when I started reading about investing. Late at night, after work, when the apartment was quiet and the only sounds were the fan in the corner and traffic outside the window. Index funds, compound interest, retirement accounts, inflation, risk, asset allocation. I did not understand half of it at first. It felt like a language built for people who had already started ahead of me. But I kept reading anyway, because I had finally seen that money could do more than disappear. It could multiply, and that idea changes your entire relationship with reality. I made my first investment with $2,000, and for a few days I felt smart. Not rich, smart. Then the market dropped. Of course it dropped. It always drops right after you become emotionally attached. I remember opening the app and seeing red numbers where I had expected to see progress. And for a second, I felt the old fear rise up in my chest. That old instinct that says, get out now, before this gets worse. That moment mattered more than the money itself, because wealth is not built when everything feels safe. It is built when fear arrives and you refuse to let it drive. That was the first real shift. I stopped treating money like something fragile that would vanish the second I blinked. I started treating it like something that could compound, and that changed my behavior. At $50,000, the danger looked different. Not because I was still broke, but because I was no longer broke enough to be terrified all the time, which sounds like progress, and it is. But it also creates a different kind of risk, because once your life gets a little easier, discipline starts to feel optional. That is when lifestyle inflation begins whispering. It does not shout, it does not attack, it whispers. You deserve a better apartment now. You deserve to order food because you are tired. You deserve nicer clothes. You deserve a car that makes your life easier. You deserve a few subscriptions. You deserve to feel like life improved. And some of that is true. The problem is that every upgrade becomes a new normal. Every convenience becomes a habit. Every habit becomes a baseline. And every baseline quietly moves the finish line farther away. That is how people stay broke while making more money than they ever imagined. Not because they are irresponsible, because they confuse comfort with freedom. At $100,000 net worth, I started feeling the difference. I stopped flinching at every transaction. I stopped obsessing over every grocery total. I stopped feeling like one small emergency could destroy me. That part was good. But then, something worse showed up: comparison. And comparison is a strange disease because it does not make you want less. It makes you want more in a way that never feels finished. Now, I was not comparing myself to survival anymore. I was comparing myself to other versions of life, people with calmer routines, people who could travel without stress, people who never seemed to think about money while spending it, people with cleaner apartments, better cities, more freedom, more options, more visible success. And suddenly, $100,000 did not feel huge anymore. It felt like a checkpoint. That is the part nobody explains. Financial progress does not remove desire, it refines it. It gives your dissatisfaction better taste. At $250,000, my relationship with work changed completely. I stopped respecting income just because it was income, because I started seeing how many high-income people were still completely trapped. People making six figures who still asked permission for their own time. People with nice lives on paper and no real control in practice. People who looked successful but were emotionally owned by their calendar. That changed me. I started obsessing over leverage, not motivation, not hustle. Leverage, systems, ownership, assets, anything that keeps working when you are not sitting in the chair forcing it to move. That was when I started building something on the side. It was small at first, almost embarrassingly small. A skill, a project, a business idea, a digital product, a channel. Anything that could grow without asking for my whole life in exchange. At first it made almost nothing. Then a few $100s, then more. Then one month it made more than my paycheck. And I remember that exact moment because it did not feel exciting. It felt unreal. I sat there in silence looking at the number, not because it was huge, but because it changed the rules. For the first time, my time was no longer my only source of value. That is the real beginning of freedom. Not when you become rich, when you become less dependent. At $500,000, my life started looking successful from the outside. That is where things got more complicated, because success changes your social world before it changes your soul. I became harder to relate to. Not because I thought I was better than anyone, because the life I was living no longer fit inside the same conversations. I stopped wanting to spend money just to prove I belonged. I stopped saying yes to plans that were really just social pressure, dressed up as fun. I stopped trying to explain myself to people who only understood success in the old way. And that created distance, not dramatic distance, quiet distance. The kind that happens slowly enough that nobody comments on it, but strongly enough that you feel it every day. You start noticing how many conversations revolve around spending money people do not really have. How many people perform confidence because they are terrified of being seen clearly. How many people are exhausted by a life they keep pretending they chose freely. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. At $1 million, the fantasy finally died. This was supposed to be the moment where life finally becomes easy, the moment where all the pressure disappears, the moment where the universe hands you some kind of invisible trophy and says, "You made it." That did not happen. The number changed. That was all. I still woke up with the same mind, the same habits, the same fears, the same unresolved patterns, the same tendency to overthink, the same old emotional furniture I had been carrying around for years. That was the shock. Money does not transform identity, it reveals it. The millionaire version of me was not some new human being. He was just the same person with more options and more responsibility. And the emotional high I had imagined for years never really arrived. What arrived instead was clarity, a quiet, uncomfortable clarity. I realized I was never really chasing money. I was chasing relief, and relief has diminishing returns. At $3 million, money became infrastructure. That was another shift completely. I stopped thinking like someone trying to earn and started thinking like someone trying to position capital. Where should it sit? What should be liquid? What should compound? What should be protected? What should be ignored? The game got quieter. The loud people in finance started looking amateur to me. The real wealth I saw was calmer than I expected. No need to perform. No need to impress. No need to narrate every move out loud. Real wealth was boring, and I mean that as the highest compliment. At $10 million, reputation became an asset. People returned calls faster. Doors opened faster. People assumed competence before I even spoke. That sounds flattering until you realize what it really means. Money does not just buy comfort. It changes how reality responds to you. And if your identity is not built well, that kind of access can quietly corrupt you faster than poverty ever could. Because now every room starts reacting to you. Every conversation has hidden value. Every relationship starts to feel more fragile. Every compliment starts to feel more strategic. You begin to learn that attention is not respect. Access is not trust. Reaction is not understanding. At $25 million, my life became difficult to explain to normal people. Not because I thought I was above them, because the language of my life no longer matched the language of everyday survival. I was talking about allocation, exposure, timing, taxes, ownership, structure, durability. Other people were trying to make rent. Both realities were real, but they stopped translating to each other. And that creates a kind of loneliness most people never talk about. Not loneliness in the dramatic sense, not the romantic kind, just the quiet kind that comes from realizing your life has become harder to describe honestly to the people who knew you before it changed. There were moments, even at the highest levels, when I still remembered the old life so vividly it felt closer than the new one. Like the grocery store at 10:18 p.m., like the cracked phone, like lowering the screen brightness before opening my bank app, like sitting in the car for a few seconds too long before going inside because I was mentally preparing to count pennies in public. And those memories never fully leave. They do not vanish when the money arrives, they stay. They become part of the architecture of who you are. That is what nobody tells you about net worth. It is not only a financial ladder, it is a psychological record. Every level changes what scares you, what comforts you, what you tolerate, what you notice, what you value, what you think you deserve, and eventually, what kind of person you become when no one is looking. And the strangest part is this: most people spend their whole lives watching the number change, never realizing they are changing too.